Hi there. In this video, we will continue our discussion on the fraud examination process. And just to give you a recap of what we have covered so far, that when we start the fraud examination or any kind of audit to check if there is a fraudulent case, first we look for any red flags that might give us indication about a fraudulent case. And the red flags are not the final thing that we look for, but it's just the beginning. So if we find red flags about some kind of incorrect data or manipulated documents, then we go for the next step and try to search for an evidence. The evidence could be document, the evidence could be interviewing, the evidence could be interrogation and some kind of invigilation and observation. So we need to know what's going on before we jump into a conclusion about a fraudulent case. And once we get the evidence, we start to analyze the evidence and collect more data. How can we do that? We can make interviews. We interview usually the third-party witness, then the corroborative witness, then the co-conspirators, and finally, we go to the target, which is the suspect person that we feel that maybe he is or she is the person who committed the fraud. And then once we finish the interviewing process and we come up into a conclusion that this person is the suspect, then we might go into interrogation where we go through the process of seeking admission from the suspect to be the object or the subject of the fraudulent case. And if you remember in the previous chapter, I say we go through the interview if there is a crime that happened that way. So we go by the witnesses and we end up by the target. But in the financial crimes, we reverse it. We go first to the target because we check the financial data. If we find weak internal control or lack of opportunity, then we go straight to the management who made the assertion that the financial statements are correct. Meanwhile, the financial statements are not correct and we don't trust the data. And in this chapter, I will continue talking about this specific issue. But now when we check the financial data, we use the IT information and the data processing. So with this in mind, let us jump into our chapter where we can dive into the information technology that we usually use it when we talk about financial crime. And in this chapter, we will start talking about the computer software and the computer hardware. We check the control environment, we check the risk, and then we start to check if there is any control on the input of data or the process of data or the output of data. Because remember, putting the right data in the system cannot guarantee that the output will be correct. It could be manipulation in the process that can shift the output and make it inaccurate. So with this in mind, let us first talk about the control environment. To have integrity in the data and trustworthiness that the data is correct, we need to check the origin of the data and the credibility of the data. How can we do that? We usually check the original document. So if we have data input, then we ask for any invoices, any receipts, any checks, any bank statements. Those kind of original documents will become helpful to ensure the integrity of the data. If we find there is lack of control or segregation of duties, this immediately will give us a hint that the data integrity is compromised. And remember that if we have garbage in, it means the input of the data is not correct, or garbage during, which means the process of the data has been manipulated by the IT professional, then we end up by garbage out, which means we don't appreciate and we don't trust the financial statements that have been issued by this company, and we have to make substantive testing. So how can we check the integrity? We make two types of a check. The first one, we call it general control, which is talking about the IT, about the hardware, about the system itself. And then we go to the application control. Application control, where we, for example, talk about QuickBooks as an accounting application for the data entry, or Oracle or ERP. So the application control, it's related to the application we use in accounting when we enter, process, and get a printout from the data. So in the general control here, we talk about how much control is happening inside the IT operation. How can we do that? We check that each job or each task inside the IT department is maintained by separate individuals. So for example, the website programmer is different from the technician, different from the user, different from the librarian. Each job in the IT is taken by different individuals. Why we do that? To make sure that if one person try to create or try to make a compromise in the data entry or in the IT operation, somebody else will find it out. But if we have 2 or 3 jobs are maintained by certain individual inside the IT department, we say that this person might make a fraudulent case and then make a cover. So we check the segregation of duties inside the IT. And then we check also the kind of control over the computer operation. And then we move to the system. The system like the ERP, the Enterprise Resource Management. And this ERP system is usually covering up all the operations of the company. So we check the development of this system, and the integration of this system is under control. And the maintenance of the system also, it's going according to the scheduling time or the dates. Why? Because if we don't make good maintenance to the system, it might be collapsed or it might be hacked by other individuals inside or outside the company that might compromise the data integrity. And then we ensure that there is a regular backup is happening by the system, and there is a contingency plan in case the system collapsed or got damaged. So here we check if this control is existent inside the IT department. And then we check the data management system and if there is any e-commerce going on. So here, this can tell us the general control has nothing to do with the data. It's mainly related to the system, to the hardware, to the department. And if we check this one when we run the audit, then we come up with 2 different conclusions. Whether we say there is a good control, and in that case, we make, well, as you can see it on the screen, test of control. So here we trust the control system, but we make some kind of testing on different areas to make sure that the control is in practice. If we don't trust the control, then we make substantive procedures or substantive testing. Substantive testing, we check the system from A to Z as if there is no IT department in. Substantive testing costs a lot of money because it takes a lot of time from the fraud examiner and or the auditor. So we need to know that the control will be tested by the IT audit or the fraud examiner to see if the control is working in practice or not. Now let us shift the gear to the application. So if we trust the department of the IT, then we see how the information is processed throughout the system. We check here, or we can use something, we call it computer-aided audit tools and techniques, CAT. And CAT, as you can see here, it's tools and techniques. We check it to make sure that the data has been entered, processed, and reported properly. First of all, for the application control, which is mainly related to the input, we check the source documents, that these are original. We check the coding of the data, that we usually make codes for the accounts, codes for the documents, that the coding is working systematically, and there is no missing documents in the middle. We check if we make batches or online. What do we mean by batches control? Like the salaries. We make the salaries once every 2 weeks or once a month. We check each batch of documents for the salary, whether bi-weekly or monthly, to make sure it's processed correctly. If it's online, then we try to check one of the online transactions to see how it's going. We check the validation. Validation control, it means if the individual tries to enter incorrect data, the system will send a prompt message warning the user that the data has been entered is incorrect. Is there any kind of the validation control? Validation control, for example, when we enter the phone numbers of customers or suppliers, the phone numbers, we know that it's usually digits. If the individual try to enter letters, then the system will send a warning message to say, this field requires only numbers. This one, we call it validation data. So validation, it means the system will alarm the users if the data that has been entered is not correct. Record validation, it means we validate the records that we enter, that they are correct, they are in sequences. And good example, if we try to enter the data not in chronological order, like invoices, then the system will report it back. And then we examine the input at the end that the data is correct. And as I said, the input of the data, it's a very good point to begin with, but it doesn't guarantee that the data has high integrity until we check the process control and the output control. The process control, they ensure that the data is processed systematically without any manipulation from the IT professionals. Because remember, the IT professionals, they can use different softwares that can manipulate the data. The output, whether it's in form of printouts or files or shows up on the monitor, it should be correct as well. And then we identify the responsibility of the users. Now, when we check the general control related to the IT department and the system, the application control, the input, process, and output, we come as auditor or examiner to check this, what happened either in the general control or the application control. And here the auditor or the fraud examiner can use two different ways. The first one, we call it black box approach. So this approach is used by the examiner to check that there is a control over the data. The white box is, as you can see from the name, it's a lighter approach, which means the system is good, but we just need to check. The black box approach, it develops understanding of the system, and we test the integrity of the data and the system. So this can tell you the general control and the application control. The black box has more procedure. It's not mentioned in this slide, but if you want, you can read the book. It has more procedures, and we use it when we raise question mark about the integrity of the data. The white box, it means we appreciate the control, but we check the authenticity. It means who authenticate the transactions to be entered. How accurate is the information? Is the data entered from the journal and it was posted to ledger, trial balance, financial statement? This way we call it completeness. Excuse me. Redundancy, it means if the data has been entered in multiple files, and this might take space from the system, so we need to avoid any redundancy in the data entry. Access audit trail, it means we take a sample from the transactions and we check the original documents, and we check a sample from the original documents to see if they have been entered correctly. So the audit trail, it goes both ways, from the system to the document and from the document to the system. And then we check the rounding error testing, if there is some kind of rounding that happens to the numbers or not. So this is what we do with the data, the black box and the white box. Then we shift the gear to the individuals who are working on the IT department, because very few people usually in the IT department, they understand the information technology. Usually those people are engineers or programmers that have been working in this department, or people who have been working in this IT department for years. They develop good experience in the department that is not available to most of them. And the IT system personnel, those people, because of their experience and their familiarity with each other, they might make collusion where they manipulate the data for the sake of getting some benefits out of it. So the collusion means the control exists, but there are more than one person are making secretive agreement to manipulate the data together so they can cover up, to show from outside there is a segregation, but from the inside there's secretive agreement among those individuals to take benefits out of the manipulation of data. And how can they do that? As I mentioned earlier, they can substitute inappropriate version of software to alter the data. And this is pretty much flexible now. If you have good experience with the softwares, you can go and you might change the process of the data to manipulate the output and make it appealing to the users. The IT auditor comes, or the fraud examiner, or the forensic accountant, they will come to ensure that the control environment is it's in practice, it's working, and there is no collusion among the individuals. So here in this screen, we talk about the audit for the individuals, not the system. Then we go to the evidence itself. And as I said, like here we talk about financial data, so we talk about digital evidence. The digital evidence, it means we go through the documents to see how the information has been entered accurately and with the normal speed. And what we can do for the digital evidence, we usually make imaging of the hard disk to know bit by bit the information from this hard disk, and we copy it, take it to the forensic lab to check that the hard disk imaging and make sure there is no manipulation happened in the process of the data. I know this might be too much if an individual tries to do it, but with the new softwares in the market, this can be done in a very short way, because there are lots of softwares can work on the data imaging and discovery of any manipulation. And for that, we use computer forensics that we can use it. And I will mention a couple of them in the coming slides, that the computer forensic or the digital forensics now make our life easy as examiner to check the data integrity and come up with any irregularities or anomalies in the data. Then to do that, we usually get subpoena from the court to get access to the digital evidence. Remember, the forensic accountant doesn't have the right by the US Constitution to search the individual equipments or assets without subpoena from the court. So we usually get the permission from the court, which we call it search warrant or subpoena, that gives the right for the examiner to get access to the different devices and download the data from them. So we get usually the initial acquisition, and then we document everything on paper. As I said, there are two different ways to get access to the data. One, we call it Roadmaster, the other one, In-Case. By the way, I reached out to the In-Case company, trying to see if they have academic version of their software that we can use it in the classroom, but I didn't get any reply back from them. But if you want, you can check it online. In-Case, it's a software to investigate and analyze the data in different platforms, identify information despite efforts to hide, cloak, or delete data. In case it's a very good software that we use it in forensic accounting that can help the forensic examiner to discover any manipulation to the data. Roadmaster, it's like what we call it portable forensic lab. So instead of taking all the equipment from the organization, whether computers or iPads or cell phone, smartphone, or any other devices, and instead of taking them to the lab to get the information and bring it back, we bring our lab, which is computer on a wheel, that we can take it and we try to analyze everything. It's portable computer forensic lab, acquire and analyze the data, preview and image the hard drive, as I said, and remove and erase stored file and programs from the hard drive. So the Roadmaster and the in-case are good examples of how to get access to the data. And please don't get the impression if the data has been deleted by the hacker or the suspect or the perpetrator, it means we cannot get it. Now with the new software, we can get access to the data even if the file has been deleted, as long as we didn't make reformatting to the hard disk or making copy of different files on the same space on the hard disk. Files can be recovered. Emails that has been deleted can be recovered as well. So with the new software, life is becoming more convenient for the fraud examiner. How we recover the deleted files? We go back to the hard disk, because usually the first 3 digits of the file that has been altered when the file is deleted, we go back and check those 3 digits, the hash number of the file, and we try to see where is the file that has been deleted and try to recover. If the computer space had been used for writing another file, then it might be difficult to get the file that has been deleted. Defrag command, it's been an old command even in the Microsoft DOS, where we try to make use of the unused space on the hard disk. We make defragging so we can use the space more efficiently. Undelete software, search for clues as to the location of the disk space where the deleted files resides, and this can help us to get these files back. Also, the same thing that happened for the files, it can be happen to the emails, and we can get it back. So emails are stored in mail folders. Each folder is considered a separate file. Prior to compaction, deleted emails may be recovered using softwares. We can definitely get them back. And e-discovery rules require organization to provide electronic files going back in time. Probability of deleted email recovery is greatly enhanced. As I said, now don't believe it if somebody tells you that this email has been deleted or the document has been deleted and you don't have access. Yes, we might not get access as individually, but using different softwares can help us to do that. Once we get the deleted file, we can restore it back. And we know in Windows, by the way, we have undelete, which can bring the file back from the trash box or the trash bin, put it back into the right folder. But even if the file has been deleted from the trash bin, we can get it back by using the different softwares. Restore lost files under more challenging circumstances, we can do that. Stop writing to drive to increase the probability. Once the fraud examiner reaches to the crime scene, he will get access to the hard disk. And remember, the hacker or the IT professional might have a logic bomb on the computer that whenever the fraud examiner is getting access, then the whole system will crash, and then the fraud examiner will not be able to access it. But now we say once we get access to the computer, we try to take a screenshot from the screen, handle it by professional or expert in the field to make sure that the system doesn't crash. And this is what we mean by stop writing to drive. So we make sure that we don't get anything written on the drive to avoid any kind of logic bomb that might be embedded by the hacker or the perpetrator to crash the whole system. Of course, now high security or privacy software make the chance of restoring the file non-existence. People, they might make like some kind of privacy rule that might not enable you to get access to this one. But even with that, we can break it down and we can get access to the software or the file that has been deleted. Manual restoration is sometimes needed. And here we need to check how much time and money and software we can use and how much benefit we will get from this one. Then once we get the digital evidence, once we get the recovered file, we need to examine it. So we must have understanding of what could go wrong, targeted approach required, and then we see if we get this one, we need to identify what kind of file it is. There are flat file, there is hierarchical and network database. The flat file, like the Excel file, like Word file, Microsoft files, the flat file has sequential or indexed or hashing or pointer file structure that has information on the file itself. But database file, it means the file is connected to other files, which we call it hierarchical. And good example is if I have the revenue account related to the income statement, related to the commission account. So here the file itself, if it has been changed or manipulated, other files will be changed as well. And this one, we call it hierarchical database or integrated database. We need to check this one to see the kind of relationship between the files. There is a rifle shot approach that if one file is changed, then it will change the rest of the files. And here, there are some tools and techniques we can use it for extracting the data, and whether this data is financial or non-financial or operational like process. We need to check the control points. We need to check the demographics. We need to check the locations, the business sector, product line, and so on. So here we need to disaggregate the data so we can separate all the financial files in one section, all the non-financial files in another section, the process, the marketing, the admin, the HR. And this way can help us to see where is the data that we're looking for. And once we access it, it doesn't change anything in the other files. And the one we are looking for, we call it targeted file or the targeted approach. Here we target certain files or certain database to see if there is any kind of anomalies that happened to the data, irregularities that happened. The examiner might stratify or classify the preliminary results to identify if there is subgroup that are more likely to be of concern. And good example, if I take the accounts receivable file, I might try to segregate the customers by their geographical location and see which location exactly that might be manipulated, and then I check for any anomalies there. The examiner may determine that a particular data analytics technique is not effective and that the data should be examined differently, and this is quite possible, especially if the fraud examiner doesn't have good understanding of accounting background. He might run some analysis, but then if it doesn't bring any kind of good results, we might do a change the approach to get better results. So remember here that we need to check the control, either general or application. The IT usually, or the IT audit happens on the personnel of the department. And then once we make a good coverage of our examination for the system and the IT department, we go to the data itself. And we try to get access to the data, whether the data is deleted or is still on the system. And we run our examination on the data to see if we can come up into conclusion. The next point here, we extract the data, and we can do this through different softwares by making sorting. And this is what I've been using in IDEA. is trying to extract the data. And if you remember in the first assignment, we call it direct extraction. So in the file I sent you an idea, I was talking about if there is no approval on certain number of hours, and it was like 80 hours. So here we need to sort the transactions, see if a certain group that has not been approved, then we make selection and extraction. We might join different files if we need to. We might check multi-file processing, how the processing that have been affected multiple files. We can make correlation analysis, verifying multiples of a number, and compliance. And here the multiples of a number like Benford law, it's been used by IDEA to check the multiples of the number. But because the shortness of the course time, I'm not going to use it. But there is one way to check the multiples of a number: compliance verification. If there is any kind of authorization or approval for the transactions. Duplicate search. Duplicate search, it means if the document that has been entered multiple times, and this could happen, and the data entry person can slightly change the amount of the invoice and make the original invoice in one entry, photocopy of the invoice in a different entry, so we can make the two invoices as two different records, but with a slight change in the amount. We can check if there is any kind of duplication like this. Vertical ratio analysis and horizontal. We check the ratio analysis in the income statement in proportion to the sales, and this will be for certain year. We call it vertical. Horizontal analysis would check the sales of 1 year compared to the prior years, to the last 5 years. This one we call it horizontal. We check the date functions, the recalculation, transactions, and balance exceed. Date functions here, by the way, we check if the date format is the same in all the time, because sometimes we might change the format between the European style and the American style, and this can cause some issues in reading and interpreting the data. Data extractions and analysis software we choose based on individual case, which is most appropriate for the current investigation. And remember, the kind of extraction we use it in a fraudulent case doesn't have to be suitable for another case. We take each case individually. We might have like two categories of data mining and knowledge discovery software. And here we use either public or commercial publication. So here we use different kind of extractions because we need to extract the data the way that can help us to come up into a right conclusion. I hope you find this video useful on identifying the application control, the general control, the IT department, the extraction of the data, the recovery of the data that has been deleted or removed, and the analysis on the extracted data. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.